All right, everyone, great. As a reminder, we will have the photo booth until 3 p.m. today. So you're going to have some other chances if you didn't quite get it yet. I'm really excited to tee up the second panel today. I mentioned this morning that you're going to hear a lot of the words that we use all the time, but that they're going to mean something a little bit different today. And in our second panel, we're focusing on security and resilience. For once, it's not about patching vulnerabilities. It's not about winterization. It is about security and resilience in yourself, how you show up, how you lead, how you work. And before we start, I'm going to share a short story about our moderator, Chris Guiney. I was so lucky to meet Chris about 5 years ago, almost exactly now. It was after Winter Storm Uri. I live in Texas, so I will also blame some of my white hair on living through that week. It is probably the time in my life when you realize how close we all are again to the state of nature when we lose all of the comforts around us. Chris reached out to me. He was searching around for potential candidates for this board opportunity at a company called ReliabilityFirst. We got on the phone. Chris told me about ReliabilityFirst, what they did, what the mission was, what they were looking for in a board director, and it was so interesting. And it sounded so exciting, and it was so timely after having just lived through what I did in Texas. And my immediate response to him was, "That's amazing. I'm not ready." And his immediate response back to me was, "I'm the expert here to figure out if you're ready or not, and you are ready, and you are going to have this conversation." It was exactly what I needed to hear. So I can tell you've heard this before from other people, probably a lot of women. And I reacted that way because I didn't feel secure in myself. I didn't feel that resilience, that self-groundedness that I thought I needed in order to show up and be valuable and productive in the boardroom. I just didn't feel it. He responded perfectly, which was basically just to cut through the crap and say, "I've talked to you, I know you, you are going to be a good fit for this, and we are going to go through the process. And no matter how it ends, you are going to learn a lot through that process." He was exactly right. And that's why the resilience, it's so much more than a technical metric. It's a leadership imperative for us. As there is so much churning around us, there's so much changing, and increasingly we as women are the ones at the tip of the spear to lead that change. That resilience is critical. So our panelists are going to talk about this topic today. We have an amazing lineup of people. Chris is going to introduce them all to you. I encourage you to listen for some of the themes today that are going to resonate with you, that you're going to take when you leave. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to y'all.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Joanna. That was completely unnecessary. Joanna won that role on her merit, not because of me. But I just want to open with a couple of comments. First of all, I have to get a headshot because I realize I have no idea who the guy is in that picture. That was 10 years ago. And I don't want to get a headshot because I'm never going to look better than that. It is so cool to be in this room. I want to thank Nikki and the ReliabilityFirst team. This is an amazing room of women. And frankly, I'm in a room with some of my favorite people that I've ever worked with in my career. So this is as big an honor as I've ever received. I want to mention just a couple of things. You know, I heard this morning Joanna talked about celebrating, and I think it's a perfect opportunity to celebrate each and every one of you. And these women on this panel, I can't even explain to you how honored I am to be in their presence and knowing what they've accomplished. And so I think celebrating them is incredibly perfect. Nikki talked about courage. I don't know that I could come up with a better story than what Nikki talked about. She's one of my very favorite people, and she is as courageous as anybody I've ever known. But these women have all had to go through all incredibly courageous times in their careers too, and that is just an unbelievable story, and I hope you'll hear more about that. And then finally, the good doctor talked about mindfulness. And I think being present and listening to what you're about to hear from these women is going to be as much of a gift of this conference as you'll ever know. So I want to thank you all. And I also want to everybody remember that it's okay to wear super cool shirts up here on the podium like the doctor did. So no more ties and suits for me. It's all going to be super cool shirts next time. So welcome to our panel on security and resilience. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Chris Guiney. I'm with CarterBaldwin. And on this panel are three extraordinarily successful and resilient women, as Joanna said. We're going to talk to Lisa Barton, President and CEO of Alliant Energy, Christine Martin, President of PPL Electric Utilities, and Diane Holder, ReliabilityFirst, Vice President of Strategic Engagement. Our electric grid is in a period of extraordinary change. New technologies, new security threats, and a generation mix evolving faster than ever. Meeting that moment requires leaders who can adapt, anticipate, and remain steady under pressure. We called this panel Security and Resilience because it takes a certain amount of self-confidence or security with yourself to navigate these and other challenges, and it takes resilience to recover when things don't go as planned, and we know they hardly ever do. The women joining us today embody that security and resilience as much as anybody I've ever known, which is just as much about leadership under pressure as it is about infrastructure and systems. Their careers, their leadership reflect the same strength and reliability we ask of the grid every day. We're going to start with a little fun. We're going to start by asking each panelist to quickly introduce themselves and describe themselves in one word and explain why. So Lisa?
Well, thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you. Can you hear me okay? All right. I can't really hear myself. So quite the challenge to try and figure out, one word that describes you. And for me, I would say what I do is what I wanted to study in school, but did not study in school. And that would be to be an architect. I always wanted to be an architect. I love design, the form and function, and figuring out how do you solve for the complexity of a situation. And that's really what I would say that I do as a job. Now, my undergraduate's electrical power engineering, and I went to law school, but it's those skills that I use to figure out where the company needs to be, the team around me, where we're going, and just designing around that. So it's taken me 38 years to get there, but I'm here.
Love that. Christine?
Great. Hello, everybody. Gosh, the word that comes to my mind is curious. And it is really that curiosity that has led me to sitting here in front of you today. I never dreamed of being an electric utility president. Been great though. I actually went to school, undergraduate and graduate in political science and economics. And I was maybe I was telling you, Lisa, last night, I actually thought that I would be working for the State Department, likely internationally, in negotiating treaties around things like energy and economic development and environment. But that lifelong curiosity, asking questions, not being satisfied with not knowing, really kind of led me on a path to walk through doors as they opened to where I am today. And it's been a great 30-year career in and around this sector.
Good morning, everybody. So if you would have asked me that question much earlier in my career, not to be funny, I would have said reliable, and now I'm at ReliabilityFirst. And back then, conscientious, dependable. I always took great pride in getting stuff done, and I still do, and I'm still reliable and still conscientious. But I think in leadership, that had to obviously evolve a bit. It's more about the team and the company and our mission, and making sure we are doing all that we can to achieve that mission, and that we're on the right path to do that. So I think maybe reliable has evolved to more, say, deliberate. I think that's the word I would use.
I just want to point out, Christine, to what you just said. It goes back to what Joanna said earlier, look up. And Christine looked up and she got there. So I love that story. Thinking about how it was mentioned that resiliency depends on leadership under pressure, Diane, we'll start with you. Can you share a moment in your career where you had to remain steady under extreme pressure, and what helped you lead effectively in that moment?
So I have a few different types of pressure I just want to cover quickly because there are a lot of different types. That's a loaded question. Certainly execution pressure, much like being on a panel today, and the preparation that you do. And I think that's kind of, as long as I'm fully prepared, I feel like that's a positive pressure. It's an exhilarating one at times if you're prepared and you achieve, whatever you're out to execute. But I think when I led the operations center for a utility, and I would say some of the pressure we felt there was operational, for lack of a better word. And sometimes that operational pressure was kind of moderate over the course of several days, like during a storm outage event, thousands of customers out of power. The activity was constant. It was, moderate pressure, but constantly. So you never really realized it at the time. There were other operational moments when customers weren't even impacted and we were watching a situation evolve on the system. And it was very acutely stressful. I can remember a Memorial Day weekend. A line was very critical to reliability. It was very hot that weekend and we needed to keep that line in service. We had a great plan until we found out that a demolition was going to take place next to our line, and they didn't want to change that demolition. It was a smokestack that could have impacted the line. So we had to kind of pivot and rethink our plan, and people had to be told they were going to be working that Memorial Day weekend. So that was pressure. But I think the pressure that sticks with me the most is like the human types of pressure, those awkward or those difficult conversations we've all had to have, the ones you feel in your stomach and you never really get over. I can still think of, the way I felt the day that I'm talking to customers in their backyard. It's a nice residential community, very nice landscaping and like nice trees and that were very healthy. But we also had 138,000 volt right away through that community, and the company had changed its vegetation management program, and we changed from trimming the trees to removing them. And so you had to tell the customers and you tried to empathize. And I think there again, preparation, thinking about how they're going to feel and putting yourself in their shoes and thinking about how to go about talking to them through that message is, I think preparation has always helped me. Even in the operational moments, I relied on my education and background and experience. Our operational procedures, we always took great comfort in those as well. So I think preparation is kind of across all of them, but it looks different depending on the type of pressure.
Christine, same question. It's so lonely sitting in that CEO chair. There's really nobody to ask. You have a board that you have to report to, but you have to make those decisions. Talk about a little bit of extreme pressure in your career where maybe you felt you had to make some tough decisions and how you learned from that.
Yeah, it's in some ways a hard question to answer because there's so many different experiences, and sometimes it's really only when you look back on them that you realize you were under extreme pressure. Sometimes you really feel it in the moment. And I have to actually apologize for being 5 minutes late walking up to this panel. I don't make a practice of that, but I actually have one of those extreme pressure situations right now. So just needed to set some things in motion before coming up here. But I really wanted to be here because I think this is such an important discussion to have. So let me actually just center it around a pressure situation. So when I stepped into this role in late 2023, my company was still in the midst of a pretty extreme crisis. It was a customer billing crisis, and anyone who is in this business understands how critical and devastating that can be, both from a reputational standpoint, a financial standpoint, a regulatory standpoint. So I was stepping into that, and I think a couple of things that I put into motion that have served me well under those pressure situations is taking that moment to step back to think, what's the end? What's the end state need to look like? So that vision of this is going to pass, we have to work through it, but creating that common end state. So that's something that I needed to do for the business and the various groups in it, was really to kind of have that vision of where we needed to go, where we needed to end up. Having empathy, but also demanding accountability. I walked into a situation of extreme regulatory scrutiny, again, challenges with our customers, a very 100-year-old company that really rarely makes a mistake, losing customer trust, but then also employee morale. So it was really navigating all of those things and being looked at as not new to the company, the corporation, but the new leader of having to have a steady hand to take us through that situation. So again, I think it starts with maybe that deep breath of where do we need to go, not being frantic, because there's a lot of noise when you're in extreme pressure situations, whether the noise in your own head, the opinions of everyone else about how you should deal with whatever you're dealing with. So I think that presence of mind and creating that shared vision, understanding that it's not just up to you to figure it out. I would describe myself as a collaborative leader. I rely on my teams. If they don't exist, I create them. Finding who those trusted individuals are who know what you don't know or fill gaps that you have, and really kind of working on those individual work streams to propel forward. So this was a big issue. I've done this though, just on things that were kind of my own, just to figure out, where I've gone to trusted advisors to kind of help me through it. I think the other piece is really ownership, just taking ownership of the situation, meeting directly with our regulators to say, hey, we messed up and this is my plan to get us through. So I think those are kind of attributes to, I think, take you through, or how I've taken through different situations. Again, taking that step back, big picture, getting my team, those folks that I need and can rely on, accountability, right? Who needs to deliver so that I can deliver, and then really ownership. And kind of that can look, in this case, it was regulators and customers. It can look very different in situations, but I think those are just different attributes that I've used to address and kind of ultimately come through on the other side.
An amazing lesson in mindfulness that is. Lisa, our industry is changing quickly, everything from grid modernization to new security challenges driven by technologies like AI and quantum computing. From your perspective, how has the energy sector evolved, and how has that evolution changed what's expected of leaders today?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris. And as I think about it, we're really in the midst of a tectonic shift. Just an example from an Alliant Energy perspective. Over the next 5 years, we will grow our load by 50%. And that's with the data center contracts that we already have signed, where there's land control, we know the generation, their load ramp, all of that. And then there's another wave that's going to come. And I think what is happening for us as a sector, and what it means from a leadership perspective, is that all of a sudden, all eyes are on our industry. No one noticed the utility industry for the 38 years that I've been in it, right? We've always been operating below the radar. The only time that we're in the news is when something really was concerning, a storm, things like that, right? Large power outages. And then you would have your mea culpas and talk to the regulators, and people would forget about it. Quite frankly, even Storm Uri, as devastating and life-altering and life-ending as that storm was, there's not much of a focus on it in Texas or even elsewhere in the country. Now, every day, there's conversations from politicians talking about utility rates and affordability, and we need to re-regulate them. We need to do things differently. You think about that 50% load growth that I was talking about. How do you position yourself in the company to be able to do that when now you're going to be above the radar, right? You are going to be front and center. We're going to need to be building generation everywhere in our service territory. These data centers are taking over 1,000 acres and building these large data centers. So we have to lead in a very different way, one that is recognizing the fact that we're going to be out there in the community and that we need to pivot from a reactionary mode, which is traditionally how utilities have always operated, to one of being proactive and making sure that we're transparent in everything that we're doing and that we're not secretive. There's this push for populism right now as well, which just creates another headwind. And when we talk about leadership, I like to use analogies. And for me, part of what we need to do is we need to be great ship captains, sailors. And we need to make sure that we're figuring out how do we take advantage of the tailwinds that we have and navigating the headwinds. And that is going to take active management with us, with our teams, with our regulators, and just making sure that we're taking those deep breaths day in and day out to be able to make sure that we're bringing our best to the table and that our team is bringing the best to the table, because this growth is real. It's meaningful for communities, particularly rural communities. I'll just give you one quick example. Cedar Rapids, QTS is building the largest data center in the country in our backyard. $10 billion is being invested in infrastructure alone, another 20 to 30 in the chips. That's transformational, and it's right next to another data center, and that's under construction. The mayor of Cedar Rapids is looking at a 20-year plan. They never were thinking about a 20-year plan before. This gives them that opportunity. So great opportunities out there, just a lot to navigate.
That's amazing. There was a time in this industry where the de facto elevation to the CEO role might have come from engineering, or maybe it came from finance. But now, effective leadership in our field requires balancing all of that. It requires balancing the complexity of the technical aspects of our industry, the complexity of the regulatory, the financial, and of course, the strategic. Lisa, let's start with you. What leadership traits do you believe are most critical for navigating this transformation in the sector?
So I think a big part of it is making sure you're getting what the company needs from your team. And I like to talk about it as unlocking their potential is how you unlock the company's potential. And you see at different times, a lot of times there'll be a CFO who moves into that spot, or somebody who's coming from operations. I think today, more than ever, it needs to be somebody who's a strategist, somebody who is able to adapt, who's able to make sure that in uncertain times, your team isn't fearful of making a mistake, because I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that you can ever make is being afraid to make a decision, being afraid to challenge your own organization. And I think those are some of the skills that as a sector, we need to get a lot better at. There's always a tendency, I think, in that CEO role of, I know all the answers. I've been here for 38 years and da, da, da. And it's BS. It really is. No one is that smart. No one has all of those skills. You really have to figure out, how do I bring that complementary team around me, just like Christine was talking about, and how do you make sure you're building that resiliency that Diane was talking about, and resiliency in that team where you're getting out of their way. Somebody told me that probably 25 years ago. As you rise in the organization, the biggest and the best thing you can do is figure out how to get out of your team's way. There are hurdles that are there, and your job is to pick up those hurdles and get rid of them. And I would add to that, and to take the fall if something goes wrong, because once you unlock that potential of your team, there will be some mistakes. And in the end, it's your wins, your losses. You're the coach of the football team, and you've got to make sure that you're accountable for all of that.
Christine, I'd love to get your perspective on that same question. Leadership traits.
Yeah, I think certainly the strategic nature, I absolutely agree with, because you really have to, from this perch, you have to see everything, and not just what's in front of you, but what's coming, right? We talk about our, our 5-year business plans and execution. And yes, that's the, the financial roadmap and operational roadmap to get you there. But that's a continuous process. So I agree absolutely with removing the hurdles. I think along with that is really clarity of strategy. I think for people to really be empowered and confident, they have to understand where we're going, right? It's not always, 100% clear. There's a lot of uncertainty. And as we just talked about, our industry is moving at a very rapid pace. But I think that shared, from a leadership standpoint, having that shared alignment in your organization is so, so important. Creating a space for teams to come together and figure things out and bring them to you. I've had at times conversations with my leadership team, my directors, to say, look, if I'm figuring things out or telling you what to do, we're both making a mistake, right? Unless it's a really critical decision and I have to make it in that moment. If I'm spending my time directing and a really talented vice president is just taking notes, we're both failing, right? So creating that alignment, creating that space for folks to figure things out and bring them to me or my leadership team when they need advice or direction or consensus, that's fine. But I like to create space for people to do their work. There's a reason. I always say there's a reason that you're here. There's a reason that you are in your position. And so empowering them to be able to do their best. I think the other piece I would say for me is also challenging assumptions. So I don't come from an operational background. Sometimes that's really actually good in my position. I have a very talented COO, but sometimes I'll ask a question. And I don't, I'm asking because I don't know the answer, but just by virtue of asking that question or challenging an assumption, I've unlocked an opportunity or a place where we've always done it this way. And so we do it this way. So I would just say, challenging assumptions, creating alignment, creating space is really, I think, what leadership is about. It's not having all the answers, not directing or being directional, but creating an environment for excellence, really.
Diane, it's really interesting to me. Similar question, but when you think about your role, strategic engagement, what does that mean? And how do you get people to think that way? How do you get people to be more innovative in how they approach problems and how they react to the stress with real leadership capability?
So in strategic engagement, our role is to communicate with states and other stakeholders on the emerging risks that we see to grid reliability. And, fortunately, because I think our industry, when I started, it was boring and it was stable, so if you wanted like a stable job, you went to the utility industry, but it was very much classified as boring and, load growth was flat and things like that. So I fully agree with all of that. And now we're in the national news. So fortunately, Chris, it's not too much of like having to outreach to people right now. When we first started 4 years ago, when the risks to grid reliability were starting to kind of like surface, yes, we had to introduce ourselves to some extent to some of our states. But now, our strategic engagement has been converted to more in reach. We're getting more and more calls from our state stakeholders to discuss the emerging risk to reliability. So there's bad in it being in the national headlines, but also there is opportunity and good in it too. And we're certainly taking advantage of that.
Looking at Lisa and Christine and Diane's background, you realize that they've had to go through a lot to get where they are. But what it's done, and I was talking to the ladies at this table here about this, but what it's done is it's created authentic leaders. It's so impressive to see how each of you lead in times of stress and complexity. Lisa, in this sector where resilience is essential, as an authentic leader, can you share a moment in your career where there's probably more than one, things didn't go as expected? And how did you navigate that? And what did you learn that maybe strengthened you as a leader moving forward?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. And appreciate you calling us old with all of our experience here. No, just kidding.
I was going to screw up somewhere.
No. No, certainly. And, there's times of disappointment and there's times of challenges, right? So, I mean, if you look over your career, I think the best advice I can ever have for folks is, one, to believe in yourself and to always know there are other opportunities out there. There are two experiences where I would say I was professionally disappointed. I worked for a company called Strategic Energy. I was a energy consultant. They were looking for engineers with law degrees, and one day they decide, it was literally the week I was getting married, that they were closing the office. I'm like, okay, this is good. Between the two of us, we've got 5 kids and we're getting married at the end of the week. The next day, actually, I got a call from the founder who realized that they couldn't live without all of us. So he asked me back and I said, twice the rate, hourly only. And then I took the customers and created my own consulting company for a couple of years. And so part of that is being resilient. Another one certainly was when I was called into Nick Aiken's office when I was at AEP and with the lead director. And I'm there expecting I'm getting the nod for CEO. And I literally wanted to say, can we just rewind that? Because I think I heard you wrong. Because they had chosen the CFO. But it ended up being a great opportunity as well. I'm at Alliant Energy. I love Alliant Energy, was able to make that pivot within a couple of months. And I was able to learn by then going to yet a different company how to lead different people in a different culture with different challenges. I always think about it as you have to grow where you're planted. The challenges of one company are different than another. The opportunities are different. Most of my career has been in transmission. I headed transmission for AEP. I founded the joint ventures and TransSource and so forth. And now I'm at Alliant and we don't have transmission. That was it took me about 6 months to get over that. So, our focus is on generation and on distribution. So it's that resilience that you build with some of the disappointments in life that they work out. They do. They always work out. And what you need to do is just focus on your strengths and believe in yourself and believe in other people. You can't do it alone. It has to be a great team. And I think being vulnerable as a leader, sharing things, some of the not so great things that happen, make you a more authentic leader and make people want to follow you and be a part of that future.
Christine, I'm going to ask you a question that's similar, talking about setbacks and lessons learned. But I think one of the things that would be really valuable to hear for this audience is, how do you help teach younger emerging leaders? How do you help them take risks and realize that it's okay, knowing that you're going to make big mistakes? We've all done it. But they'll help you grow. How do you as a leader encourage that so that they reduce that fear of making those mistakes?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's so important for folks to feel comfortable, right? Because resilience isn't about avoiding setbacks. You can't avoid risk through avoidance, right? There will come a time when you have to take that leap or make that decision. So the way that I do that is actually really through on the job experience. And when we're going through something, I might sometimes narrate through, like, this is what's happening. Getting them talking about their observations, and maybe when we're on the other side, I just did this last week. We're in the middle of a rate case, and I just did this with a younger manager in my office to just walk through some observations, and quite frankly, how she did a fantastic job coming through the other side. So I'll do it through kind of that experience and keeping it close to when the experience happens. I find that it's not just telling, but they're actually going through it. So I'll give an example. I had a really significant regulatory filing, and we found as we were going through it that an error was made. An error was made in a calculation that was essentially like the foundation of the argument. And that's really big, really big. So one, I'm glad that I had staff that had the courage, creating that feedback loop, that had the courage to come in and tell me, and they did it in pairs. I think I think they were a little fearful to come individually, but a pair came and they were watching for my reaction. Of course, I was disappointed, but I didn't freak out. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't throw up my hands. It was all right, this is really bad. How do you think we remedy this? So, cutting to kind of the positive is they laid out a path. It was a really good path. We hired a different expert, reran the calculation, owned up to the regulator and the interveners in the case. Actually, their suggestion, that mistake, was actually a blessing in disguise, because the analysis we had to remedy that was actually even stronger. So it was that doesn't always happen. We were ultimately successful, but a couple of things, and we walked through that. We did a event analysis. So one, it was how you recover from bad things happening, and not kind of wallowing or being afraid, but owning up to it and quickly pivoting. But it also had us put in some controls and some rigor that was lacking. So again, it wasn't just it happened, and we move on. It was a learning experience, but also I think improved us. And so I would say that particular team, because they've done two additional kind of big initiatives since then, they are operating in a very different way than they were when we initially had that kind of case. So, kind of seeing that in action and then reinforcing it.
That's great. For those of you who don't know me, I have 6 boys. And one of the things that I tell them all the time is you really haven't figured out what life is like until somebody punches you in the face. And fortunately, every one of them have been punched in the face. Not by me. But Diane, I guess that would lead to, that's an odd segue, but let's go with it. Let's go with this question. So when you think back on your career and you think about moments that have shaped you, moments that were legit, that really helped you legitimately become a leader, but maybe they didn't seem significant at the time. Can you talk to some things that you look back and say, this was important, and this is something that you need to recognize if this kind of thing happens to you in your career?
Yeah, I do have a few things that came to mind with this question. First, early on in my career, I started straight out of college. I was a power services engineer, which meant I was the industrial customer point of contact. And they obviously had a lot of questions and concerns regarding power. And it was a very enjoyable job. And to the extent that they had outages, I had to understand how their business processes were affected so that I can help them and communicate effectively with them. And I realized that while I was supporting the customers, I thought I could do a lot more if I knew more about the company. This was straight out of college. So I made a decision at that point that I wanted to kind of broaden my horizons. And over the next several years, I took on different roles in engineering and reliability, and also energy efficiency. And I really do think that kind of helped form a foundation for me, that helped me later in leadership, just having that broader understanding of how the company operated. But a couple of the other things that I can think of is, and I think someone touched on it earlier, but when I think it was you, Lisa, but like with someone believing in you or seeing something in you that maybe you're not really fully thinking of yourself, and that was the case when a former boss of mine called me and wanted to promote me at another company. So I had been 23 years at the one company, and he asked me to come over, and I really didn't think I was prepared for that role. I was very reluctant to take it, but the more I thought about it, I thought so highly of him, and I thought, if he thinks I can do it, and I think highly of him, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to go do this. So I think that was definitely a moment in my career that set me on quite a path. The other moment I'll mention briefly, I was in external affairs at the time, and Superstorm Sandy in New Jersey, I was assigned to work there for a couple weeks while all those customers were restored. And I was assigned to kind of interact with all the mayors of one of the counties in New Jersey. And, emotions were high, and I learned so much in those moments, but it was very, difficult at times because you didn't have all the answers. You didn't have the answer that they were looking for. And so being transparent, though, and the value of being transparent, I learned the value of that in that short 2 weeks, and establishing a trusting, relationship with mayors that I really didn't know before that. But yeah, I would say those are the moments that come to mind most for me.
That's such a great story. It just reminds us all to believe in yourself, trust your gut, believe in what you're capable of, and have the confidence, even if you really don't know what the next step forward is. It says for our last question, but we may have some time for questions from the audience, which I think will be very valuable. But I will ask this. Lisa, let's start with you. What do you wish more people understood about the realities of leading in this industry?
So I'm going to answer that question with a question to you all. How many people feel this industry is a technical industry? Okay. How about regulated? I would challenge that it's a people business. It really, at its heart, is. And when we think about it from the perspective of looking forward, that's the one thing I think we have to keep in mind. We've been sleepy. We've been under the radar. We've only been in front of the camera when there's an outage and we're talking about restoration and so forth. Now we have countless governors who are trying to get elected on the affordability platform. There are a lot of folks, particularly environmentalists, who are against data centers because they're concerned about the fossil fuels that are going to fuel the data center growth. And they are actively working with universities and sponsoring papers to be very negative about our sector and industry. These are things that we are not accustomed to. We're accustomed to a 1%, maybe, ooh, 2, it's wonderful, right? And a few years ago, and just navigating a bit of those, the regulatory relationships and things like that. It's turning on its head, and we have to get a heck of a lot better at telling our story proactively, and really talking about it as unlocking the potential of our customers and communities, because that is what we are. We are foundationally responsible for the economy of the US collectively and individually our own local economies. And we have to make sure that we take that to heart. I had the opportunity to go, we have a day at the Capitol, and we did that in Wisconsin here. I guess it was last week, feels like a million years ago. And members of the legislature were just unhappy from both sides. Don't like the coal, don't like the gas, don't like that damn wind, don't like the solar. It's, you know, you're plowing over good farmland. And of course, the affordability. We feel that we're solving for all of that because I'll just give you an example. In Iowa, we have agreed to 0% rate increases for the next 5 years, and we want to be able to continue to that. How we're going to do that is the unique regulatory construct that we're able to secure via a settlement in combination with load growth, and believing in ourselves that we're going to be able to do that. And believing that these communities, particularly rural communities that really struggle from an economic development standpoint, typically because there aren't the people to fill, say, the factories and so forth, data centers can really be part of the solution. Well, that's all to some extent theoretical. It's just, we know it from just following the math, but folks in the communities, some do, some don't. And so this very much is a people business. It is, as Diane mentioned, being empathetic, figuring out what do they need, and recognizing that we are solving for something that's different from what they're solving for. So if you think about regulators, they're solving for a shorter term. You know, maybe say the next 4 years, maybe 10 years. We're trying to solve for 20 years, 40 years. Then you have politicians who are often trying to solve for 6 months or max 4 years. And that is something fundamentally that we have to keep in the back of our minds, because if we don't, then we will not be successful in being able to drive this AI revolution that really can change our lives for the better, elongate our lives, make sure that we're able to see things like what Nikki experienced, right? If you just think of those old, now I'm dating myself again, those AT&T commercials from, I think it was the mid-1990s, the We Will. And those were so impactful. We as a sector need to get behind all of that, along with data centers, technology, because the future can be wonderful. It doesn't need to be dark, and it doesn't need to be that death scroll that we all look at the end of the day. We have to turn that narrative around, and I think that it takes a different type of leadership at the individual level and at the sector level to make that happen.
Great answer. Christine, same question. What do you think more people need to understand about how to lead in this industry?
Yeah, I think, and that was a great answer. People, absolutely. It's a very people-centered industry, both from our employees, but also our stakeholders. I mean, we are, at the end of the day, we are providing an essential service to customers. And I think that is both a privilege. It's also a challenge, because there are a lot of many of the stakeholders that Lisa mentioned who really think that they understand our business, and they have opinions of how it should be run and what we should do, and they're often competing priorities. And so I think the thing that I would like people to understand is just how terribly complex it is. It seems very simple: deliver safe, reliable, affordable, sustainable energy and competitive returns to our share owners, right? It is extremely complex. I worked in government before I came to the private sector and working for PPL. And it is not terribly different in that, except for the fact that you actually have investors and you've got that challenge. But it's that you have so many stakeholders. And as energy companies, as utilities, we're at the center of so much, and we're balancing all of those stakeholders, and our customers want us to do certain things, and our regulators and our employees, and you name it, politicians, others. So it is, I think, unusual for, as an investor owned, publicly traded company to have to balance so many stakeholders. I used to have a CEO. I worked through a number of CEOs at the corporation, and one great guy. And some days, this is when I was running our government relations, and some days he would say, Christine, I just want to deliver electricity and make a buck. I don't want to think about all this other stuff. And every once in a while that comes into my head, but we've got a very complex business. We have an awesome responsibility, but we also are such enablers of opportunity in our economies, in our communities. We are extremely impactful. And so that is kind of marrying all of that. It is really, it takes leadership with great breadth, a lot of patience, very strategic, and I would say courage. And that is something that at times I think we have actually lacked in our industry, is courage to say the thing that needs to be said, not in an irresponsible way, but really in a responsible way. Because look, we are the experts. It is what we do. And I view it as actually an imperative and a certain amount of responsibility to not kind of hide behind fear or platitudes, but really having the courage when the stakes are high, like they are right now, to really step up, because it is not just the right thing to do, but it's the necessary thing to do. So I think it's really just the complexity of all of those things that we're dealing with and kind of balancing all of that. And really being, look, we're not going away, right? Your energy company, your utility is always there. And so we're in for the long game. And I do think we need to treat it that way and really be a strong voice, perhaps stronger than we have been in the past.
Such amazing wisdom. Diane, anything you want to add to that?
Yes. So I'm going to steal from our boss, Tim Gallagher, the CEO of ReliabilityFirst. He often has said our industry moves more at the speed of a barge than a speedboat. And that's not a criticism to the industry at all. And nor am I saying it in that fashion either. It's kind of the reality of the timelines to build the infrastructure, to study first and foremost, to even study to figure out what infrastructure you need, then the time it takes to site and build. And people, it would be helpful for people to understand that the power plants coming online today started, those conversations about them started years and years ago. If you look at the interconnection queues and the RTOs, they are reflections of policies and market signals from several years ago as well. And so there's this natural time lag that makes our decisions that we're making today of utmost importance. And I think about the decisions that we're making today around IBRs and large loads and how they're going to interconnect with the grid and how we're going to keep the grid reliable through all that, what additional standards we may need, performance requirements, and all of that. And it's really important and imperative to get it right, because it's going to take a lot to turn the barge around years down the line, and then it may be too late. So I think that's what I think would be good for people to understand.
Masterclass in leadership here. I think we've got time for a couple of questions. If anybody would like to ask anything of this panel, it's a great opportunity.
Okay, we do have a question that came in through Slido. So I'll go ahead and ask that one. And this is up for grabs. Anybody can jump in and answer it. How did you learn to strategize? Was it a class, a life moment? Any insights there?
Well, I'll share how I taught my team to strategize. So in a short story. So I was offered the vice president of engineering and something or other back when I was at AEP, about 500 people, or managing director of, I think there were 5. But in that managing director role, you could do really whatever you wanted. That was maybe the joint ventures. We would go off footprint or things like that. So I chose the managing director, which was a lower job because I thought that I could use a little bit more of my creative side. And what we would do is I took a room in our offices, and it was an interior conference room. I painted all of the walls so that they were, you could write on them. And every Thursday we went in with a problem. And so it's like, okay, what problem? And I made sure that there was food, because you have the extroverts who want to talk, the introverts who are quiet, and you wanted to hear from both. And so we would just write a problem on the wall and figure out what would we try and solve for. And it was a tremendous amount of fun. Two of those folks in the room are with me now, actually, and now it's different puzzles that we have, right? We're trying to figure out, how do you grow at 50%, and how do you make that 50% more like 100% if you can. So it's just sometimes having safe space, and you can do it a bunch of different ways, but you have to create a safe environment for people to think outside of the box.
Yeah, I would just to add to that, I think in terms of for myself, yes, I mean, I had, formal strategic planning courses and things like that, but that's just the framework. That's just knowing vision, mission, goals, objectives, values, and how you organize it. But I think for myself and what I institute with my team is really around that, the kind of the shared vision, but then the questioning. I think those questions that can help to evolve into the strategy. What are we trying to do? How will this advance whatever that objective is? And I think if you continue to kind of iterate, you don't have to have all of the answers, but if as you iterate, you come up with what that roadmap is. It also is really important because through that, you also identify those things that aren't serving the organization, not serving the objectives. And so I think it's really, for me, it's a very iterative process. And that is something that I've not in the same creative way you have. Now I know why you wanted to be an architect. But really, it's just in having that curiosity, asking questions, challenging our assumptions. And sometimes the idea is still the right one to fit into the strategy, but maybe you're taking a very different direction than you thought when you started talking about it.
Michelle, I don't have a lot to add there, but I will say it's also important to take the time and make time to do it. It just won't happen on its own if you don't. And also thoughtful about all the stakeholders that could provide relevant input into your plan and incorporating their thoughts.
I love all that. Great insights. Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Thank you. Hi, this is Anaisha J. Kumar with CIRC. And I love the conversation about encouraging teams to make mistakes, being okay to take risks. I've heard stories, particularly with women, that, when mistakes are made, it's often intentionally or unintentionally assumed like, oh, because women don't make great leaders, even if it's not said aloud. So I was looking for maybe what advice would you give, particularly when you fail or things don't go right? How do you defend your credibility?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think things are changing. I think women tend to be harder on themselves than the world sometimes is with them. I think part of it just gets to making sure that there's a conversation, not just where you're defending yourself, because I think when you're starting to defend, you're almost losing. So part of it can be when you're applauding somebody else for taking a leap of faith, and even though it resulted in a mistake, it's a backwards way of saying, then make sure you're forgiving me for my mistake, right? and it's doing it in a way that's not about you, it's about others, and it's a little bit more of a subtle way of influencing. And I am a firm believer the subtle ways of influencing people work much better than a direct approach.
Something that I'd add to that is sometimes there are mistakes, right? And they're very obvious. Sometimes it's just hindsight, right? The old hindsight is 2020 and someone's just second guessing you. And it really wasn't a mistake. It was the best decision making at the time. It just did not work out as expected. Sometimes it's externalities. Sometimes it's, imperfect information, right? But you were on a path. And the reason I say that is because I think one of the most important things that you can do is around communication. So at whatever level you are in an organization, it's really having that effective communication up and out so that you're not operating in a vacuum. Because for me, it's very rare, unless it's just like the mistake I described in the regulatory filing where it was really an analysis mistake. Oftentimes those mistakes don't happen in a vacuum. And so I think managing expectations, finding those individuals who have a shared responsibility in terms of having inputs into whatever the decision-making or initiative is really important. And it's not to spread the blame. It's to really have that shared experience and not surprising. So if you're keeping your leader informed of what you're doing, if it doesn't go as planned, you're not hopefully in a defensive position, but they've kind of understood the critical steps and analysis you've taken. So I think the response can be very different. Where I've seen, mistakes be really those legends, those legendary things that you continue to hear in an organization are oftentimes because they were surprises. No one knew. No one, the risks weren't well known. The path being taken wasn't well known. So that would just be my advice, is make sure that you are communicating well.
And I'll just quickly add, I do believe there's always a story, and I don't mean that in a false way. There's always a story behind the mistake, behind the missed goal. And I think it's to our benefit to communicate not just the specifics, but the story behind it. What else did you accomplish, or why weren't you able to, what took up your time such that you didn't meet that goal versus that, this goal. And also, from the leadership side of that, I had a boss that on a mistake that I made, when he went to tell me, he's like, look, we're going to talk about this one time and we're never going to talk about it again. And I really appreciated that from the leadership standpoint. So that's all.
Just had one more thought, which is maybe what you do is you remind people nobody ever made it to the Super Bowl without dropping a couple of balls.
Amazing job.